It's nearly 5 years to the day since Toronto elected John Tory, rather than Doug Ford, to serve as mayor of Ontario's capital city. A lot has obviously changed in the intervening years. Most recently, that included a multi-billion-dollar transit deal with the province, led by Doug Ford, that includes the much-debated Scarborough Subway and Downtown Relief Line. With us now on that and some other aspects of his tenure, there's John Tory, the 65th mayor of the City of Toronto. And Your Worship, it's always a pleasure to have you in that chair.
Thank you, Steve.
In terms of what's best for Ontario's capital city, what did you think of the federal election results?
Well, I think the Trudeau government in its first term was a good partner for Toronto. And, people would ask me this question that journalists always ask, which is, how did they do on keeping their promises? And I said, well, actually, quite well. And when it came to saying they were going to give us money for transit and develop a national housing strategy, which they said they would do before the last election in 2015, they actually proceeded to do those things. So I felt that they got cities, not just Toronto, but they got cities. And so in that sense, I would have said, well, if those are people that and they get cities, and you have every indication from their campaign commitments that they're going to continue to get cities and provide the kind of building blocks and support that we need to, keep Canada's economic engine going, it wasn't a bad result. It's a minority government, so in that sense, in a way, I even hold out greater hope that if they're not as responsive on some of these promises they made as they might have seemed during the election, we can use others to push them. So I think it's fine, and now we've got to go forward and just get the stuff done people want us to get done.
I want to go off the path with you just for a moment here, because you're 65 years old, you're the 65th mayor, you've been a Conservative for 87 years.
No, correction. I was a Conservative for, I belong to no political party.
I understand. You don't carry a party card now.
I do not.
I understand that. I understand. But
I was an active Progressive Conservative.
You were the leader of the Ontario PC Party. Correct. You were the principal secretary to a former Conservative premier. Anyway, you, I think, would have some insight into why the current incarnation of the Conservative Party of Canada got shut out in the 416 and barely made a dent in the 905. What do you come up with?
I come up with a couple of things, and probably in this order, frankly. I think a lot of the stuff where they left out on kind of issues like social conservatism and the environment hurt them, because I think that a lot of people who live in Southern Ontario, and many other parts of the country too, I would say, actually don't want to see social conservative issues. It's not everybody, but not most people don't want to see that sort of dominate the political discourse. They would rather see us addressing housing and crime and transit and so forth. And on climate change, same thing. I think we can have a lot of debates about how we go about solving the problem, but I don't think there's too many people that doubt we have one and that we should be addressing it. And there seemed to be some doubt on both of those accounts as to how much time would be spent, addressing social conservative issues and how much time might not be spent addressing climate change. And then the second thing is, I'm not sure the Conservative Party looked like it got cities, to use the expression that I used a few minutes ago in regard to the Liberal Party. And that simply speaks to how much time do you spend in your platform talking about affordable housing. And I recognize in parts of rural Canada, although in many smaller towns across Ontario that are watching here tonight, they have a problem with affordable housing too. It's on a different scale. But when you don't talk about that kind of thing, people who live in cities think maybe you don't get it or you don't realize it's a problem. The same to some extent with transit. So if you ask me that question, which is why didn't they connect with people, I would say that's a big part, maybe not all of the answer, but that's a big part of it.
Okay, you mentioned transit, and let's go there right now. I'm going to, just for the purposes of our conversation, overly simplify the deal that you just made with the provincial government, which essentially gives the province control of designing, building, and running the Ontario line. It sort of starts at the Ontario Science Centre in kind of Midtown, the eastern part of Midtown Toronto, coming down through Flemington Park and Thorncliffe Park, going south, right into downtown and across west towards Exhibition Place and Ontario Place. In exchange, you get to keep ownership of the subway system, which was something that was important to you. Tell us why you believe that's a good deal.
Well, of course, I'll go beyond your attempt to save time by oversimplifying, respectfully, I'd say. First of all, I think it was really important to the city, and I believe it was something that was a justifiable position for us to take, that it was much better for us to maintain control of our own subway. We built it, largely paid for it with a lot of City of Toronto taxpayer money. But more importantly than that, we were operating it as an integrated system with the buses and the streetcars. If you have two different owners trying to operate an integrated system, that's just not going to be as good as having one owner. So I think that was an important point. When I said I was going to make more complex what you simplified, it's simply to say this. In addition to them getting to build and own and we're going to operate the Ontario line, which was very important too, that we should operate all of these new lines that they own, because then we can operate it as an integrated system. They're paying for it. And so in that sense, they're making significant investments that will then free up money that will allow us to address something we haven't for decades addressed properly, which is the state of good repair of the existing system.
You'll grant this is unprecedented, though. Normally, the city, the TTC itself, plans, develops, is responsible for building, putting out the contracts. That's been your bailiwick for the last 70 years.
Well, no, because there was a major exception made to that under the premiership of Dalton McGuinty and when others were mayor of Toronto, which was that the Eglinton Transit Line, which again, for the benefit of people who don't live here, is being built right through the middle of the city, a big east-west, the biggest present transit program in North America.
100 yards north of the station.
Right. Is being built and paid for and will be owned by the province of Ontario and operated by Toronto. So it was a model that we had proven before worked. Okay. People had agreed to it. And so we're simply saying, okay, if that model works, we will use it again for these expansion lines, and that allows us to keep ownership of the system as it presently exists.
How confident are you that they will hit the due date of the year 2027 and the price tag, which is almost $11 billion on this Ontario line?
The price tag is always difficult on these huge projects, only because you encounter things along the way that surprise you. And that's like renovating a house. I think most of the viewers will have renovated a house, and when you open a wall up, there's something in there you didn't know about, and it costs more to fix it. The timetable, I think, is going to go a bit later than they thought. I think they're going to strive hard because they really seem very determined to meet 2027. But again, everybody knows, everybody that's done a house renovation that's watching TVO knows that stuff happens and it delays you to some extent. But look, I think they're very determined to try and meet 2027. And I would say, let's say they were 2 years late. I'm just picking a number out of the air. That 2 years is the same 2 years that would have been the earlier date we would have had the relief line built, which was a part of this same path that's followed. So in that sense, I want it to be done as quickly as possible. I just want to get it built. But I would say to you, if it slips on the timing a little bit, I hope it doesn't. But if it does, that will be still earlier than or equal to what we would have achieved on our accelerated timetable for the former relief line. So I'm an optimist, and I'm going to be pushing hard to help them to get this done as quickly as we can.
5 years ago, when you campaigned for mayor the first time, you unveiled something you called SmartTrack.
Yes.
And it did capture a lot of attention because it seemed to you seemed to plant a flag for public transit in a way that was achievable, affordable, and made sense to a lot of people. Would you agree 5 years later, SmartTrack, I don't want to say is dead, but essentially doesn't look anything like what you thought it was going to look like?
It looks different. And I guess, 5 years in public life, 5 years in transit planning, especially around here with governments coming and going and whatnot, is an eternity. But I will say to you, the concept that represented, which was using GO train tracks that are in the city, have been laid down for decades and decades more effectively to move people inside the city and to connect up the job hubs, is still very much there. There are going to be SmartTrack stations. They will be the first.
Of them, though.
Pardon me?
You said 22 once upon a time.
But you see, this is a really false comparison. And this is one area, and I'm not critical of the media. As you know, I think I've been treated very fairly. But when they say it's 22 now down to 4, the 22 always included GO stations that were going to be refurbished, always. And if you're fair as well and add in the stations on the Eglinton West LRT, which is part of Premier Ford's transit plan, which we also have bought into in the context of the development you referred to a moment ago, then there's actually going to be as many as that or more. But the bottom line is, how many new SmartTrack stations are there going to be? Well, the fact is that that may be a lesser number than was the case when I was campaigning. But I'd say to you, we're still going to have several new SmartTrack stations built as part of the commitment that I made, financed by the governments together, including the City of Toronto, and they will be in service probably before any of this other transit that we were talking about. They'll be in service in like 2022, 23, well before some of these other lines we're talking about. So it's still real, it's changed, and I concede that point without embarrassment. At the end of the day, we're getting it done. And I think, again, do people care what it's called? Do they care exactly who owns it? Do they care how many stations there are compared to what you promised in an election campaign? They just want us to get on with building transit and to work together on doing it. And that's what I'm doing, and I'm proud of that, and I will continue to do that. I've brought together the other governments. and whether it was Kathleen Wynne and Stephen Harper, or whether it's Justin Trudeau and Doug Ford, and help them to work together, and they've come to the table. I mean, it's not just because I did so, but we're going to get more transit done. We have more money available today for transit and housing than ever before, ever in the history of the city. And so when we get bogged down on how many stations, what name has it got, the concept is there, using GO train tracks to move people inside the city and to build some new stations to do it, and we're going to move forward with that.
You mentioned Doug Ford in that answer, and I want to pick up on that. The first year of his premiership, you two famously didn't get along very well, and he decided to cut the size of Toronto City Council in half, and you were caught unawares by that, and I think it's fair to say that your relationship was pretty terrible. What's it like now?
It's a work in progress, but much improved, I would say, because, look, I mean, I fought back. I mean, it wasn't even so much on the size of the council. I fought back, but I knew it was kind of a losing wicket because the Constitution is clear. It shouldn't be this way. I mean, all these years later, we should have had a modernized Constitution, but we all know the realities of trying to change it, and nobody's got an appetite for that. So I knew that that was a losing wicket for us in terms of the law. And so what I really fought back on behalf of the city of Toronto, not because I was trying to engage in a fight with Doug Ford or anybody else. It doesn't matter to me who was there. He was there, and they tried to impose unilaterally in the middle of the year cutbacks on things like public health and a number of other areas. And I fought back, I believe, on behalf of the people of Toronto very effectively.
You went door to door.
I did.
You were knocking on doors.
And I would have continued to go door to door for weeks on end until we achieved at least some of what we wanted to achieve, which was to save these programs from unilateral, thoughtless cutbacks that seem to be done almost by people closing their eyes and drawing a pencil line through a budget item. So that, I think, marked a turning point in that I think they recognized the fact, as I have from the beginning, we all have to work together. The taxpayers all pay the bills for all these programs, public health and everything else, child care, and they don't expect one or the other government to be acting unilaterally just to cut stuff out because they had a problem or because they felt like it. And so I think now we're working much more effectively. The transit deal being a great example of that. I mean, Caroline Mulroney, Kinga Surma, and the Premier have all worked well with us, and our officials worked well with each other to get a deal done that I believe, if we can move it forward and get the things built, will be historic.
There was a time, though, when there was a time you would find out about policies coming down from Queen's Park,
including uploading,
in a text message the night before the announcement was going to be made.
That's changed.
Are those days are gone?
I have ministers now coming to my office, and by the way, I would happily go to their office if they phone and said, "Can you come up and see me?" But they actually come to my office and sit down and say, "This is what we're thinking of doing. What do you think of that? What are the implications of that for Toronto?" It's a sea change. It's a dramatic sea change.
Why do you think he's seen the light on that?
I think he, first of all, made some changes in his government that I think were important.
That is a sly reference to the fact that Dean French is no longer chief of staff.
Well, I think that was a contributor. Again, that's no disrespect to Mr. French. Everybody has their own style, but I think the style that was adopted during those early times was a very aggressive style that said, well, maybe we'll think to let them know we're going to change something in their city, or maybe we won't. I don't really know. I wasn't there. I just know the result was very unsatisfactory from the standpoint of a kind of cooperative relationship that must exist between the country and the province's largest city and its economic engine, a huge government that is elected by people. I was elected, by the people, the 3 million, almost 3 million people that live in Toronto. So, and that's not to place any importance on me, but the councillors too were elected by those same people. And so to totally disregard them and sort of pretend they don't exist or just say we're going to steamroller over them is not what people want to see. They want to see governments working together. That's my style anyway. You know that.
I do. You didn't like the way that Doug Ford cut the size of City Council in half. You didn't like the method, the process by which it was done. But it's been done. And would you concede he was right, actually, to have a smaller council? It does work better now, don't you think?
Well, in some respects. But so I will say the meetings seem to be sort of shorter, but that's pure mathematics. When you had 45 people that all had their 5 minutes to speak, because you get 5 minutes on every issue to speak and 5 minutes to ask questions. So do the math. When you change it to now be 26 people, including me, that get to speak and ask questions, it's shorter. And so that part works. And so far in the term, one of the things that I am proudest of, frankly, is in terms of my time here, is I've helped the council to work better together because of my own style, which is to say that you try to build consensus and you collaborate. In the municipal system without parties in all of the cities and towns of Ontario is set up that way. But I would say to you, the part that would be, not yet a unilateral declaration of success is that you now have these city councillors who I believe are confronted by much more granular and numerous problems that are put on their plates, ranging all the way from my garbage didn't get picked up to the water isn't working to the police didn't come to the fire department hasn't been fast enough. On it goes. I think those politicians my colleagues at City Council have more on their plate in terms of the quantity of stuff they have to deal with, so that I think the burden that's been placed on them per person is now twice as big. And I think that part is as yet not one where you can just say it's a big, resounding success.
Do you think, there's an effort by some people in the City of Toronto to achieve what they call charter city status, which implies significantly more autonomy and power to do Toronto's own thing? Are you in favor of that?
Well, we have the City of Toronto Act. That was something that Premier McGuinty brought about.
But they want more
so
than that.
If you said to me that we should take the City of Toronto Act and further refine it to give the City of Toronto more latitude within its own legislation and within its own government to do things, I would say the answer is yes. I rejected outright the claims of those who use the word secession to say we should somehow try to declare ourselves the province. I'm not sure how that would work anyway. I thought that was a ridiculous idea. But if you said to me, should we have to go up the street when it comes to employing traffic wardens in our city who are non-police officers that can direct traffic, should we have to go up the street and ask for permission? No, we shouldn't.
Cap in hand with short pants on,
well,
I recall somebody
that's
saying?
the expression I used to sort of draw attention to how silly it was. Should we have to go up the street even on something like the reintroduction of photo radar, which the province, I hope, will soon agree to in time to have it in for Christmas of this year to stop people from being killed on our streets? No, we shouldn't have to ask. I mean, we're a big, responsible, elected, accountable government in the City of Toronto, representing people, more people and more of a budget responsibility than many of the provinces of Canada. Yeah. And the notion that I should have to go up the street and spend then endless months and years waiting around for paperwork to be done and begging and pleading for something that makes common sense in a big city like Toronto, no, we shouldn't have to do that. And if that could be fixed by giving us greater independent responsibilities in the City of Toronto Act, then that's what should be done. But that's not my decision, obviously. Mm-hmm.
I want to read something now that you're not going to like. But that's okay. You don't mind this stuff. And then I'll get your take on this. This is Sean McAuliffe, who you know. He's a writer for the Toronto Star, and he wrote this. I wish John Tory would pull out what I call an inner Bloomberg, a boldness like New York's three-term mayor, Michael Bloomberg, who, while a wealthy conservative cast in a similar mold as Tory, used his position to dramatically push through big changes in his city. If not Bloomberg, I hoped an inner Bill Davis might rise. Instead, Tory exhibits a radical fidelity to the status quo in a city with big problems and lots of potential. John Tory would make an excellent Governor General of Toronto if such a position existed. A glad-handing, friendly figurehead who doesn't have to deal with the messiness of politics, where standing for things and boldly leading the way isn't required. Your response, Your Worship.
So we just finished discussing a very bold transit plan that we have
$28 billion.
Yeah, $28 billion. It'll be more transit that'll be built, I think, in the history of the city in any one period of time. I could talk to you about housing now, where we've taken a bold plan to take pieces of city land and deploy them immediately to launch a crusade on affordable housing, which wasn't done by any of my predecessors. I could talk to you about the fact that we've actually got governments working together now by adopting a style that is actually reflective of two realities. Number one, the city council and the power of the mayor. Michael, it's fine to talk about Michael Bloomberg, but Michael Bloomberg operates in a much different system. It comes back to your question about a charter city. He's got powers that allow him to say, this is the course that we're going to chart. And I don't have that power. I have to build consensus on what can be a fractious city council, whether it's 44 people or 25. And then secondly is the reality of what I'm allowed to do or not allowed to do within the context of the provincial government. And so I would say to you, I'll be very happy, assuming we achieve the goals that I've set out to achieve, which is to keep the city well managed financially, and we get solid ratings from our outside people who look at those things, to make sure that we get on the affordable housing issue and achieve a target that is realistic but ambitious, to make sure that we get the transit built that we need to get built, which for decades had not been built by my predecessors, and that we do some bold things like the rail deck park, for example, which I think when we get that done, because we will, that will stand as a very bold kind of achievement in a city that needs people to do things like that. And there will be more, because I'm not going anywhere. I've got plenty of time left in this term, and there may be more. And I can assure you that when all is said and done, I'll be quite happy, even if it was just a loan, that I got things functioning well again for three governments working together, billions of dollars that I have convinced the other governments to give to the city on housing and on transit in particular. And people can say, well, so what? I'd say, well, how many billions of dollars did other people get before me? So, I look at those things and I smile and I say to myself, look, in the end, if I was, my job is not to create excitement. My job is to get things done and to work with other governments to get things done. And are things slower than I would like? Yes. But are we getting things done on a transit plan, on affordable housing, on the issues that people care about? Yes, we are.
I have to follow up on a couple of things there. You just said there may be more, in a reference to the fact that when this term is over, there may be more. You've always said you're going to be a two-term guy and that your wife would kill you if you ran for a third. Are you telling us tonight you're running for a third term?
No, I'm not telling you that, but I'm telling you that that option is on the table and that she has become less vociferous in opposition to that idea, though I think that would still be her preference because she wants to spend more time with me, which I'm flattered by because I'd love to spend more time with her too. And this job, as you know from all the different people you deal with in public life, it's difficult in that regard for your family.
So you may seek a third term.
Well, and you know what I've said to people at council, because there are people at council that say sort of along the lines of what Sean McAuliffe was saying, that I'm too incrementalist. And I think you know sort of where I learned that, which is it's better to get change on a steady, even if it's a slower basis than you would like, than to get no change at all. And what I've said, and I say it here to you tonight, that we will give the people a chance to judge my leadership style if I'm going to be there in 2.5 years and have them decide whether they want something that's more exciting like we had before, lots more headlines about the Mayor of Toronto in previous times, or whether they think maybe the fact that we actually can get plans, get them financed, work together with the other governments to get things done, whether that is the kind of leadership they actually expect from someone who handles the affairs of Toronto in a business-like way, in a collaborative way with the other governments, in a collaborative way with the council. So, you know, we'll see if there's any doubt at all that some of the stuff that I'm working on here that we're just talking about, transit, housing, rail deck park, and so on, if there's a doubt about those things moving forward in 2.5 years, you can be darn sure I'll be trying to convince Barb that I should be allowed to seek another term.
How much does it bug you when you hear people say, John Tory brought a lot of integrity and dignity back into the mayor's office, given who his predecessor was, but he doesn't have the big vision? Does that bug you when you hear people say that?
No, because I know it's not true. And you know what? I'd also say when they want to discount those words, brought integrity and decency and you know, rational, collaborative behavior back to the mayor's office, I tell you, when I meet people out there at the events I do go to, and by the way, because I don't sleep much, I'm able to do the part that Sean McAuliffe would dismissively refer to as Governor General stuff. I think it is actually very important when you are leading the most diverse city in the world that you're out there with people, showing them you care about them, making every effort to bring people together. I mean, I went to the Sufi's restaurant, you know, a week ago, and it took an hour of my time to go there for lunch to say that when people sent hateful messages to that family that ran that restaurant to say, you know, get out of the country and go back home and all this kind of stuff, that I was not going to stand for that. And when it comes to anti-Semitism or anti-Muslim statements and things like that, and that's what I spend a lot of my time out at these events doing, saying to everybody, you all count here. You're all part of Toronto. And back to your question earlier on about the legitimacy of political parties, when they look like they maybe don't care as much about those issues in the most diverse city in the world, part of my job is to unify that city. So when people say that and say decency and integrity and, you know, whatever back to City Hall, I'd say there's a lot of people who sort of say, you know, that alone would be an improvement that they'd be happy with. And we're doing much more than that. So I actually don't pay much attention to that stuff anymore. I know what I need to do for the city. I know what the people expect of me. I believe I'm delivering on that. And if they need to pass judgment on my leadership style or what we've got done, then they'll have that chance at the next election if I'm a candidate.
Can you tell me what you thought of the public opinion survey that came out that showed that while the Ontario Liberal Party is in the midst of a leadership event, they have 5 candidates in the race and you polled higher than any of them?
It showed that those people who just wrote those things that you just read to me are probably out of touch. That's what it showed.
You're not running for the Ontario Liberal leadership?
No, I'm not. But
Under
it showed
any
that they're out of touch
circumstances?
because it showed people at least, you know what? I don't care if I'm loved. I don't care if people think I'm exciting. I just care that people respect me and that they respect the job that I'm trying to do in terms of working hard and working together with other governments to get things done. And I think people know, I know they know because they tell me every day that's what they see in me. They don't say to me, boy, you're the most exciting mayor we've ever had, or you know, they say you're working hard and you're acting responsibly, you speak rationally, you deal with the other governments, as difficult as some days as that may be, and that's what they want.
Can I contradict you for a second here?
Sure.
Take a look at the monitor up there. Go ahead, let's bring that up. That jacket's got you a lot of attention. You do seem to have a sense for the fashion, certainly during the Raptors run. Where's that jacket now?
It's actually, as we speak, It is on display in some hallway at the Scotiabank Arena because they wanted to take some of the artifacts, or whatever you want to call them, that were a part of that whole incredible victory run and display them. And so they asked me if they could borrow it, and I said they could, because I'm not getting it out again until the playoffs next year. But you know what that speaks to? It speaks to exactly, and I get so... I'll give you an analogy. I work for Ted Rogers, as you know, helping to run Rogers Communications. And I spent a lot of time out in town hall meetings with the employees, telling them what we were doing, telling them about the results, holding myself accountable, and listening to them. And Mr. Rogers used to say to me, well, how do you have all that time to be out there with the people? And I'd say, well, Ted, those are the people that are working hard for us, producing the results for the company. And I look at the time that I spend out in the community at events that Mr. McAuliffe would dismiss as being really important for me to stay in touch with what people are thinking. And I knew when it came to the Raptors, not only am I a rabid sports fan, as you know, I was the commissioner of the Canadian Football League, I was on the board of directors of the Toronto Blue Jays. I love sports as a fan, not so much as an athlete. I'm a mediocre at best athlete. But I knew that this was something really special that was going on in the city, and I wanted to be a part of it, not inside the building. I was there for exactly 2 games. I wanted to be outside the building, and I was at every game outside the building except one. And, you know, I learned a lot from being out there about how uniting sports was, about how uniting this particular sports team was with people in the community that wouldn't necessarily feel themselves included. And I had a ton of fun out there. The jacket was by accident. Guy said to me, that jacket you're wearing is very boring, back to this theme that keep coming up here. He said, you should wear this one. And he hands me this garish-looking jacket. I put it on once. I could never take it off. People ask me now, months after the championship was won and the celebrations have been held, where's the jacket? As if I should be wearing it out to do my duties.
They want to see it again.
I said it's coming back when we make the playoffs next spring. It'll be there.
I hope if and when that happens, you'll come back here and do the program again and maybe even wear the jacket
I
as
would
well.
do that with pleasure.
Okay, terrific. That's John Tory, the 65th Mayor of the City of Toronto. As always, Your Worship, we're pleased that you spared some time for us at TVO tonight.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.